Today, all the participants will continue the discussion on major topics like investment, opening up, and tourism. COVID-19 has posed significant impact on the above-mentioned sectors. According to a report released by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development recently, global FDI this year will drop about 40% than last year, less than $1 trillion for the first time since 2005. International tourism has been also trapped in difficulty. In the meantime, China has made remarkable achievements in combating the pandemic and facilitating the economic and social development. From January to September this year, China utilized $103 billion FDI, up by 2.5% compared with the same period of last year. During the 8-day national holiday, domestic tourism hit the number of 640 million personal time, and many scenic spots in cities like Wuhan have returned to the previous prosperity. Looking forward, joint efforts are urgently needed for the world to embark on the normal path of sustainable development. We should hold up the concept of open world economic, guide the flows of investment towards fields such as green development, digital transformation, and upgrading infrastructure, as well as public health. We should improve the efficiency of investment, making development of investment, finance, and tourism better facilitate the growth of small and medium-sized enterprises. We should create more jobs and improve the living standard of low-income groups. To achieve those, we should firmly adhere to multinationalism and the principle of mutual benefit. Relative industries also need to draw lessons from the pandemic, strengthen the ability of risk management and control, and to cultivate new business forms that are more resilient and flexible. I believe that all speakers will bring us many profound and forward-looking opinions and suggestions in their speeches. Thank you.
Welcome to the second part of Day 2 here at the Bloomberg New Economy Forum. I'm Scarlett Fu of Bloomberg Television. We're going to continue our discussions on cities by looking at how to support small business and entrepreneurs. SMEs are the lifeblood of any urban economy, and we'll talk about that in our upcoming panel, Financing the Real Economy. We also have a fantastic conversation coming up on the future of travel with the CEOs of Marriott, Carnival, Trip.com, and AirAsia.com, so be sure to stick around. Now, a quick housekeeping note. If you're a New Economy Forum delegate watching on our platform, please submit questions to our moderators by clicking the Ask a Question tab below the video player on your screen. You can also respond to polling questions posed by our moderators by clicking on the buttons below the video player. Now, to kick off our program, today's Moment of Culture features Abigail Washburn performing with Yo-Yo Ma and the Silk Road Ensemble in a true East-West collaboration. Enjoy.
已了没烦恼，不会再担忧。马在等着我，爸也在期待。乡亲团聚，都是我的爱。我的好朋Nothing's lost again. No more fret, no pain. No more stopping by the way. No more longing for that day. Gone tomorrow, no There's no break, there's no end, just a living on. Wide awake with a smile, going on and on.回家喽，回家喽，我得回家喽。路不远，在眼前，家门仍在我得回家
Yo-Yo Ma will be back to perform solo in our final moment of culture on Thursday. Be sure to join us then. Now, as I mentioned, our pillar in focus today is cities. We'll focus on how they're coping, how we can build resilience, and what the future holds. We begin with a statement from the governor of Tokyo, Yuriko Koike. Take a listen.
Yuriko, governor of Tokyo. Currently, the new coronavirus is taking a serious toll on the world. The population of Tokyo is about 40 million, but as of November 10th, the number of cumulative coronavirus deaths was less than 500, and daily severe cases has plateaued at around 30 these days. It is my hope that we can create a more resilient Tokyo that will add new value while responding flexible to new challenges. Next, I'd like to mention some of the initiatives being taken by the Tokyo Metropolitan Government to make Tokyo an international financial city again. As part of these efforts, we have established the Tokyo Financial Award to recognize businesses in Japan and abroad that promote ESG investment. In 2017, Tokyo became the first local government in Japan to issue green bonds. This year, we plan to issue approximately 30 billion yen or $290 million in green bonds to create a more sustainable and environmentally friendly Tokyo. Just last month, we established the Business Concierge Tokyo office in Hong Kong to provide support for companies looking to expand into Tokyo. In addition, Tokyo was selected as the world's most livable city in 2020 by the American magazine Global Finance in recognition of our ongoing efforts to enhance quality of life. Finally, I would like to talk about the Tokyo 2020 Games. We need to focus now on the fight against this invisible enemy to provide a safe and secure environment for all. It is my sincere hope that we can make the Games a symbol of hope and strengthened bonds for humanity, like the Antwerp Games of 1920, just after so-called the Spanish flu epidemic. So, thank you very much for your attention and looking forward to seeing you soon.
Coming up is the next installment of our New Economy Game Changer series. This series of profiles spotlight the people who are changing the game in their communities and all around the world. For our city's Game Changer, we traveled to Mexico City to speak to its first female mayor, Claudia Sheinbaum.
Mexico City's metropolitan area is home to over 21 million people. For decades, it has been plagued by increasing overpopulation and serious air pollution. Its streets are gridlocked. Access to drinkable water is scarce, and left unattended, the city is expected to dry out within the next 30 years. Crime is on the rise, and the gap between the rich and the poor is massive and only increasing. Abject poverty is rampant. But there's a new mayor in town, and she has big plans for its future.
I hope to solve many problems. The city needs innovation. Innovation for me is the use of science and technology to change the way things work.
Claudia Sheinbaum is the first woman to be elected mayor of Mexico City. But that's not necessarily the most interesting part of her story. Because she's not just an ordinary politician, she's a Nobel Peace Prize winning scientist with an ambitious vision for this troubled metropolis.
Most of my academic life, I studied climate change and energy, the relation with energy and climate change. The city is very unequal. What I want for the city is to reduce these inequalities. How to do that? Access to rights where they don't have, and a better environment, including resources to the poorest part of the city.
The mayor's grand vision includes 7 primary goals: reducing air pollution by 30%, planting 15 million trees, banning single-use plastics and promoting recycling, building a new waste separation plant for the city, providing water service to every home, constructing 100 kilometers of corridors for public transportation, and constructing and installing solar water heaters and solar panels citywide.
If you are able to change people and to give opportunity to young people, then the city is going to be different for the next years.
It only makes sense that Mayor Sheinbaum will face opposition to her ambitious vision for Mexico City. But her faith in science and its ability to address inequality and corruption in her city to the benefit of her countrymen remains unshakable.
We believe in social change by convincing people. We believe that Mexico has a great future. We end corruption in the country. And we believe that education, health, and housing are rights. They are not merchandise.
Scroll back. No. It's a game changer. Our next Global Voices illuminates the plight of small business owners during the pandemic.
The trickiest part is us not being able to operate fully. So we were closed from March to mid-June. And then in mid-June, we were only able to open for takeout and delivery. And then in July, we were open outside only, which for us is 17 seats, which is super challenging. And then this past month, we've gotten indoor dining, which is at 25%. So we're unable to maximize our sales in any way.
We're having miniature lockdowns per county in certain areas, or kind of restricted practices as numbers of COVID increase. And that just it's wiped a lot of businesses out, because just as they begin to reopen and get back on their feet, the restrictions come in and stop them or slow them down. So it's worrying times. Because
I think that, the right thing for all Americans, right, in any industry, is that everyone needs to be able to go to work and stay healthy and be safe. Mm-hmm. And the hospitality industry is a tricky one right now, because the only way to do that is for us to limit our occupancy, right? Because we need people socially distanced. So I think, what we need is a way to supplement our lost income so that we can retain the employees.
And I'd like, I suppose, a bit more of a focus on, for the mental health of the nation, really, is that, smaller industries are supported a bit more, the ones that employ people, the services industries, and just keep social interactions going.
I think we need support in putting in the right air filtration systems, especially in New York, because we live and operate in very old buildings.
If a vaccine comes out, it could be 6 months or a year before it kind of gets spread throughout the population and things like that. So really, we're looking at 2022 as a time of recovery for our industry. But for certain industries, that might just be too late.
Bloomberg Economics chief economist Tom Orlik joins us with an analysis of what the world will look like in 2050 by examining how the current global order came to exist and breaking down the trends that are reshaping our future.
By 2050, the list of the biggest economies in the world is potentially going to include some unfamiliar names. China will be number 1. India will very likely have overtaken Japan and Germany to be in the number 3 spot and be closing the gap with the United States. For about 50 years, from the end of World War II until the turn of the century, there was a period of remarkable stability in the global economy. The center of economic gravity was firmly in the West, in the United States and Europe. The intellectual consensus was around democracy and free markets. What we've seen in the last 20 years is the beginning of a transition as the center of economic gravity moves from west to east with the rise of China and other Asian emerging markets. At Bloomberg Economics, we've used a growth accounting framework to forecast GDP out to 2050 for 39 economies, from the mighty United States to frontier possibilities like Ghana. What those forecasts show is that the transition which we're living through now is really just the beginning. In the next 30 years, we'll see Asia emerging as the dominant force in the global economy. As that happens, the center of gravity is going to move from democratic systems to undemocratic systems, and from unequivocal support for the benefits of the free market to the rise of economies where state intervention plays a much larger role.
What is the role of finance in a post-COVID economy? How do we channel more of the world's savings towards businesses that create jobs? Our next panel considers these questions with speakers Ajay Banga, President and CEO of MasterCard, Hillary Clinton, former U.S. Secretary of State, and Dr. Sri Mulyani Indrawati, Minister of Finance for Indonesia. Bloomberg television anchor Caroline Hyde will moderate the discussion.
Scarlett, thank you so much for that introduction, and what a phenomenal panel we have lined up for you this evening, this morning, this afternoon, wherever you might be tuning in from. And I want to remind you, as our audience, that we really value your opinion and we really value your questions. Please do look below the video tab that you're currently looking at and type in your question and respond to our poll. And interestingly, just to whet the appetite to galvanize you into giving us your opinion, I start with this poll to get us all thinking. The poll question is, how can financial institutions better support people? Is it A, fintech can help broaden access? Is it B, better regulation can reduce disruptive volatility? Is it C, more emphasis on equity financing rather than debt? Or is it D, don't beat up on the banks? Millions have benefited from rising asset prices. Now, while you chew on that particular poll questions, I'm interested in that last point, asset prices. Good old asset prices, record highs. We're currently at record highs across US benchmarks, across global benchmarks. But this reminds us the economy, this is not equivalent to the stock market. The stock market is not pricing in the fact that we have 1 million dead, 50 million have been infected with COVID-19. It is not factoring in the fact that women are not returning to the workforce. It is not factoring in the fact that your mum and pop store, your local restaurant that you love the most isn't filing for bankruptcy. It's just quietly going out of business. It's not emphasizing the inequality that we see across the system, people of color being left behind, particularly here in the United States. So let's talk about that inequality and how perhaps finance can help fix it. I want to start with you, Secretary Clinton. Wonderful to have you here with us. And the opportunity that strikes us, but the concerns that strike you at the moment as well. How much are you focused on inequality and the ways in which we can potentially fix it?
Well, I think inequality has been and should be a major focus of our attention, and it has been made worse by the impact of the pandemic. As you point out, we have a terrible disproportionate effect of the loss of jobs, of savings, of opportunity as women leave the workforce, as disproportionately African American and other minority small businesses are among the first to shut down. I don't see how we can, either in the public or the private sector, avoid not only wrestling with, but actually trying to solve for some of these problems that have been made worse by the pandemic as we try to recover from the economic devastation. And I can only hope that both businesses and governments are taking into account the very real costs that should be calculated in whatever aid is provided, whatever regulatory changes are contemplated, as we move forward from this point.
Speaking to that, it's not just a public sector role, it is a private sector role as well. And it's been interesting, Ajay, how much corporate responsibility has sort of tried to fill a void at the moment in terms of policy making as we go into a lame duck session, but how much we see the role fall upon corporate leaders to tackle diversity, to tackle also a smooth working financial system. Talk to us about your strides at MasterCard to try and address some of the inequalities that you see at the moment.
Yeah, well, I think that as the Secretary just said, COVID has brought some of these inequalities and challenges into greater focus. But let's not forget that these problems have been there for a while. And the fact that African Americans don't get access to credit in the same way to open a business in the US as somebody else could, or the fact that women entrepreneurs don't get access to the same kind of financial wherewithal to open their businesses. I mean, there's a statistic that came out some time back that 80-something% of women-owned businesses don't have adequate financing. And if they were to get the same level of financing as male businesses, we could get up to a $5 trillion increase in global GDP, which is a 6% growth in global GDP. So, I mean, the facts speak for themselves. And so what we're all trying to do over the years, we've been trying to get, we made a commitment some years back to get 500 million people into the financial included world by getting to them through giving them an identity and an account and enabling the deposit of social benefits or salaries or pensions in them. We've done that. We've now said we'll aim for 1 billion, including 50 million micro SMEs and 25 million women entrepreneurs. We've also made a commitment to reach SMEs with $250 million of effort there and $500 million for Black-owned businesses. The thing is that all of us are doing this in some way or the other, because I think it's time for us to all say that the best way to grow our businesses is to make sure that the communities around us are healthy and growing. It's in our own self-interest to find the right balance to do well and do good at the same time, and not just make it a slogan, but actually put our money where our mouth is.
Putting money where your mouth is. I like that turn of phrase. Minister, it's interesting how much Indonesia sort of is reflective of what the issues are in the United States as well at the moment. Southeast Asia's worst coronavirus outbreak currently besetting Indonesia. You're also a consumer-dependent economy. You're also an SME is the backbone. It's about the micro and small to medium-sized enterprises are about 60% of GDP and about more than 90% of employment. How are you looking at regulation right now? And in particular, I know you're looking at boosting investment, creating jobs through the investment law overhaul, cutting red tape. How are you thinking about that in Indonesia?
Well, first, the COVID is definitely affected disproportionately, especially for the poor or the informal sector in Indonesia. That's why for Indonesia government, the first response is really focusing, of course, apart from the health as the highest priority, we also put a very significant increase on the social safety net to support around 45 or even 50% of the household in Indonesia. This is because many of the informal sector hit hard by this COVID when everybody working from home, there is no school, so all this informal sector directly affected. Secondly, we also put a lot of support for the small medium enterprises. This is especially employing women, 95% or even 96%. So we put additional resources to give additional access of capital, but also for the existing lending, they are waived from the interest payment as well as restructuring not to pay their principal up to 6 to even 8 months. We do have a relaxation or regulatory forbearance for the financial sector. You mentioned about that this crisis is not only about the health crisis. We, as a middle-income country, want to strive better, not only during this crisis, but after the crisis. That's why even during this crisis, the government of Indonesia still continue doing an ambitious reform. One of it is what we call it the omnibus law on the job creation. This is exactly what you just said, Caroline, that is try to de-bureaucratize and deregularize Indonesia. This is really to simplify regulation as well as to create job, especially for the individual and small medium. which is in the past maybe suffering from so many regulation, which is unnecessary. This is really one of the biggest fundamental problem, which is addressed by this law. We also address the issue of ease of doing business in the form of not only the permit, but also in terms of credit on how to establish company, and also for the building permit, including access of the electricity. And the last one is, of course, when you talk about inequality, it is also actually becoming even more severe when we don't have the connection on ICT, that is the internet connection. That's why for Indonesia, we're really investing now in ICT in order for us to provide equal opportunity, especially for the island or people which is in a remote area, which is not yet connected to the internet. These are all the areas that the government really look as a consequence of the COVID, as well as response to this COVID. We do really want to be, in this case, coming out as a winner as well as a better country.
Ajay, you've done a lot of work when it comes to the digital divide that we just hear the minister sort of talk of from an Indonesian perspective. How are you looking at infrastructure? How are you looking at ensuring that the digital divide isn't something that's leaving people, whether it's at a loss from a financial perspective, but we also talk about the digital divide from, an education perspective. How many children have been left behind in that respect?
Yeah, so the digital divide is real. And I mean, when Minister Indrawati was just talking about the islands and some of the more remote areas of Indonesia, here's another side to that. Again, a figure that involves women. There's a pattern, as you can see in my thinking around getting women to be empowered, is that 250 million women in the world do not have access to the internet. And that is just a disproportionate burden for them when they're already trying to struggle to get up the ladder. So a part of this has to do with just pure access in terms of broadband infrastructure and satellite infrastructure. You know that a number of companies are also experimenting with using the ability to use balloons to be able to transmit internet signals into remote areas. These are all very interesting developments. Each of them is aimed at increasing access. There is the question of affordability, of course, in terms of devices. But there are ways for governments to subsidize the availability of those. And then there's the question of if you understand how to use the internet versus if you're not even educated enough to comprehend how to play with it and benefit from it. Even if you understand, Caroline, there are serious issues with privacy and cybersecurity and the management of your data, which have made even people like us nervous about how our information is used or accessed. So I think all in all, there's a great deal of effort and energy that needs to go into this idea of digital and how it could be the ultimate democratizer of access and capabilities that we think it's capable of, but we got to watch out for things like the digital divide. I one last point for you there. I chair the International Chamber of Commerce as well as my day job here at MasterCard, and I've been making a plea for the world's leaders, for the G20 if nothing else, to put up a data and technology board, a bit like the Financial Stability Board that we created after the last financial crisis. It enabled the large countries to cooperate and look at data and technology in a constructive way, engage on issues, care about consumer privacy and safety, but enable the digital divide, in this case, to also be fought. And I think something of that nature would be very helpful.
Well, a woman who knows a lot about coming out of the last global recession and the Financial Stability Board and ensuring that banks are in the right sort of a place at the right time is, of course, Secretary Clinton. How much are we now seeing the ripe opportunity for regulation, a change in regulation, a streamlining in regulation, as we see in Indonesia, and the relationship with policymakers and banks in the US? You yourself, of course, know banks well, having been New York Senator for years, but also financial services. There can be a smooth relationship, but also one where people then say you're too close to the banks almost. How do you advise and the administration coming in, Biden in particular, of how to have a relationship with Wall Street and the banks, but also to have a smoother and perhaps new regulation to help it more seamless?
Well, I really think, Caroline, that the emphasis for the new administration should be on the so-called real economy. That is not to take anything from the financial services sector, because obviously we know the important role it plays, But there has to be a focus on how we're going to, as Ajay said, get more people into the real economy. It will do us no good to have interconnectivity if there is no reliable way of translating that information into economic opportunity. So in the United States, I think there has to be a much greater focus on the reforms that are needed in our market system so that we do give a better foundation, a better starting point for people who want to get into small and medium-sized businesses. There are a lot of regulatory and legal hurdles to the creation and the success of small businesses. I also think we have to take a hard look at our unemployment system. I think that the original stimulus post-COVID was not sufficient. It really did not reach those people, either the employees or the small businesses that were in the greatest need. We've got a lot of hard work to do to try to shift the focus to the so-called real economy. And I think that's what you'll see from a Biden-Harris administration, because if we don't get economic activity, particularly in the small and medium sized business sector, going again, if we don't get the support that people in the workplace need, particularly women when it comes to family leave, when it comes to reliable, affordable childcare, if we don't get those pieces in place, then we're going to have both serious economic and political consequences from the impact that the virus has had on an already shaky market system when it came to the real economy.
At the moment, though, Secretary, we're still waiting for any sort of next stage of relief package to be agreed, and we can't find that agreement across the aisle. How much hope do you have that that can sort of bipartisanship can be forged at the moment when the economy seems to be needing it?
Well, I'm hoping that there can be some agreement in the lame duck. Joe Biden called for that. I thought that was a very important statement that he made, that go ahead, do something now, because people are suffering now and we're losing economic ground. But if nothing happens in the lame duck session, then I expect to see President Biden come forward with a comprehensive package of relief for workers, for small businesses in particular, but generally for the productive economy. And I know there's a big role for the financial sector to play, but if you look at the data, going back certainly to the 2008 crisis, we really still have an overhang. Real asset acquisition and sustainment among so many families has never recovered from 2008. That's particularly true for African American and Latino and other families, but more generally across the economy. So I'm hoping that something will happen in the next months before the new administration comes into effect. But if not, I have a lot of confidence that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will do everything they possibly can to forge a bipartisan consensus to help the real economy.
And talking of data, you're saying how much we need to depend on data. Let's have a look at how that poll came through and where people really feel that the real economy right now that you speak of, Secretary, can be helped. I'm looking at, 47% think that fintech's the way to help broaden access. So really, to your point, Ajay, focusing on technology and that particular area that's ripe for investment, for infrastructure. Ajay, just quickly, in terms of data, tell us what you're seeing in terms of granular data from the US economy, but global economy, as we hit this so-called second wave of the virus. Are you seeing that being borne out in terms of the economic transactions being made through MasterCard?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, when we got into this situation in February, I had laid out that we'd go through 4 phases of managing the company: containment, stabilization, normalization, and growth. And containment was the free fall of March, April. And stabilization was when we hit the bottom for the next couple of months. Normalization is not really normal. It's a new normal. We're not really doing the things we used to. As I was telling you, I used to travel 240 days in a year. I now do 240 Zoom calls in a week. So life's not the same. but that kind of normalization, and most countries are at some stage of that normalization. Remember, these are not linear. we go back and forth, hence the second wave. If you recall, Japan, Singapore, they went through a sort of go backward period a couple of months back. They're out of it now. And then the growth would be the pre-COVID kind of stage, which I really think is somewhere towards the second half of next year as we go through an equitable and wide distribution of vaccines and consumer confidence getting built back from that. My data shows that consumer spending domestically is in relatively good shape. So in the United States, for example, over the last couple of months, consumer spending is growing at about 4% And if you take out gasoline, it's growing at about 6% because, gas, we're not using as much. So take that out and it's growing at about 6%. But cross-border travel, cross-border spending, that engine of growth, which impacts so many small businesses, to the point that the secretary was making, if you're a zip line operator in Hawaii, employing 7 people, you've got a bad problem right now. You may be a great business with great people caring deeply about your employees. You just don't have the inflow of revenue to be able to manage. And so that stimulus package, that fiscal, not monetary, we've got enough money sloshing in the system. We need the fiscal stimulus, and we need it relatively quickly because I can see where the second wave's coming. You can see consumer spending beginning to get impacted again.
Minister, you have fiscal stimulus. You've done fiscal stimulus, but people aren't using it, it would seem. You've offered tax cuts. You've offered the ways in which there's 200 trillion rupiah sitting around but being left unspent. Why is that, and how can you ensure that the money that you've deployed gets used?
Well, first, this pandemic is really an extraordinary, unprecedented situation for any government in the world. So definitely when we design what kind of policy response, we really have to look at what is the existing first data, as mentioned by Ajay, is very critical. And for a middle income country like Indonesia, whether the system is in place, because sometimes maybe you really have a good intention, but when you don't have the perfect data or complete data as well as system in place, then your policy design cannot be implemented. This is one of the most important challenges, and I do hope with the digital economy and all the digital technology, this can be overcome for many countries in the world. Second one is, of course, whether you are going to just pour money or you put some criteria or in this condition, and when you put in more complex, it cannot be executed. Why? Because even the government and all people, they are not working in a normal situation. Most of them now working from home. And that's why you cannot design the policy as if everybody's still working with the normal situation. And that is exactly what we really need to change, the design. The third one, the digital technology, again, help a lot. If we have, for example, targeted by name, by address, whether this is social safety net, whether this is for the small, medium enterprises, then you can be easily then targeted those people directly to their account so that there will be no conditionality, burden, or bureaucracy. But we are not having this complete data yet for Indonesia. So that is the challenge for the social safety net and the small, medium enterprises. That is the issue of inclusion and exclusion error. For the business, first, we listen to them. First, they are asking about, is there any support for the government, especially for hotel and accommodation? It is very critical for us to provide support on the electricity because they are no longer receiving gas, but you cannot shut down the air condition because Indonesia is so humid in terms of the country, which and this is especially also the raining season. So they really need to continue consuming electricity while they don't have any revenue or gas coming. This is very critical. On the incentive taxation, what we initially calculated is that the business is going to be normal, which is not. They are operating maybe only 50% or even 25%. And that's why this is the area that we really need to design and redesign policy. As mentioned by Secretary Clinton earlier, this is an area in which we really have to look at the data, the situation of the people, and then really thinking hard what is the best instrument and policy that can directly support those affected by this COVID. And my last comment in this, we may see the worst is over, especially on the second quarter of this year when the contraction is so deep. But we see the rebound on the third quarter. But we still need to be very careful because COVID is still there. We see in some countries there is a second wave, which just really can create a setback of this progress. And the most important is the confidence of the middle upper class consumer in Indonesia. This is not yet restored. And that's become the hurdle of the recovery. And that is going to be one of the most important part for business to continue surviving and recovering when they see that the demand or the market is actually progressing. And that is exactly very important to restore confidence. But the confidence really depends on whether COVID can be handled or vaccine can be invented and then distributed equally.
Health has got to be prioritized, and it certainly is being prioritized, certainly from a perspective of voicing that by the new administration. Secretary Clinton, we're hearing the focus in terms of cracking down on COVID coming from administration of the president-elect. But I'm interested in the questions that are actually coming thick and fast from the audience. They're inspired by your passion when it comes to the real economy, when it comes to supporting medium-sized enterprises. They're asking what specific type of legislation you might want to see to support that backbone of the so-called real economy right now.
Well, let me just make two quick points first, Caroline, because I think the minister made such a critical contribution in talking about confidence. Unless we get a return of real confidence, and I think that depends upon the vaccine and the vaccine availability and its delivery, then we're going to have a very long tail to the consequences from the pandemic. And I just want your audience to know that President-elect Biden has taken the pandemic very seriously. He has a world-class board of advisors, and they just today said that the failure of the Trump administration to engage in a real transition and to provide the data that only the government has about both the effects of COVID and the reliability and safety of the potential vaccines is delaying their planning to be able to literally hit the ground running on January 20th to start the very complicated process of final evaluation of vaccines and then distribution, and not just distribution in our own country, which will indeed be complicated, but globally, along with partners like Indonesia and others. So when we think about legislation that can support small and medium-sized businesses and support workers who may or may not get their jobs back, I think we have to be, very willing to look broadly about what works. I was a proponent of supporting businesses so that they would keep people employed during the pandemic. Unfortunately, we have a system where people literally have to lose their job and then they have to wait to get some kind of unemployment compensation. And so the payment, the protection payment program didn't really help enough people. That needs to be looked at now smartly. Again, using the data. We've got enough data, I believe, to make some good judgments about what is the best way to support people. I think we have to also look at how we can provide more government support through procurement, through outreach, through lending that can make it possible for more people to get their businesses going again and start new businesses. I'm a very strong proponent of community financial development institutions. They need to be dramatically expanded so that there can be more money bubbling up from both government and business and even not-for-profit sources to support the formation and the continuation of businesses. There's a long agenda, and I would just end by saying, I think there's been a lot of talk about stakeholder capitalism, inclusive capitalism, conscious capitalism. There's a lot of names for it by people who understand the importance of market capitalism, democratic capitalism in our economies and in our societies. But I think we're going to have to take a hard look at how we can better frame how the markets work so that we begin to move away from the shareholder-centric approach, from the short-term returns that practically every business CEO that I've ever worked with or even talked with has said, distorts the market. I think it's time to look at what can make capitalism, market operations work much more effectively and frankly equally to help build a real economy by shifting some of the incentives and assumptions that have grown into the system over the last 50 years.
Well said. And Ajay, talk to us about those incentives that can be shifted. You, not only as leader of MasterCard CEO, soon to be chairman, but also, as you say, helming the International Chamber of Commerce. What are you seeing that works, that makes corporates responsible, that you can also see the greasing of the wheels of capitalism to ensure that money's getting to the right people?
Well, in addition to what Secretary Clinton just laid out as a bunch of thoughts there, I would add there's one real opportunity in small business, which is to think about how to help take small business loans off the balance sheets of financial institutions, whether banks or fintechs, and create a securitization market for them, which can then help to benefit and do it with the right regulations in place so we don't revisit a challenge. But that way you can release the balance sheets of banks to go in and do more, and fintechs, by the way, to go in and do more with small businesses. Unlike the mortgage market where Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, which have made some errors along the way, but they played a big role in enabling the growth of the mortgage market here. The SBA or an equivalent institution does not do that for small businesses. And I think there's something to be thought through there in a way of doing it in a fair way. If I could just add one other thought as a business person, and I've used this example a number of times, my view is that the problems we're all facing fit on three sides of a triangle. One side is one versus many, and that's the problem of inequity, whether it's racial, gender, ethnicity, rich versus poor, the whole angle of one versus many. Another side of the triangle is humanity versus nature, and we haven't really got into a chance to discussing climate challenges, but that's a real and present danger. And that one is on the other side. And the problem with the triangle of that type, the only reason it stays up is because the floor of the triangle is keeping the two sides up. And the floor, to Secretary Clinton's point, is short-term versus long-term. That trade-off, just like the one versus many and the humanity versus nature trade-offs, these trade-offs need to be really deeply addressed. They need to be addressed through good regulation, but they also need to be addressed by companies themselves. And I think there's pressure building from investors, from your own employees, as well as from all of us to actually change how this is conducted and done. And I think to Minister Indrawati's point, I was in her office last year when she discussed the importance of simplifying regulation. I cannot overemphasize that. I think regulation is really important. It provides the guide rails for innovation and development. It's always there to protect the consumer. It's not there to pick a winner and a loser among companies. It's there to protect consumers, create a level playing field, and let people win. And I think to give you a simple example of that from my ICC hat, the small business enterprises, the most difficult thing for them to do to participate in exports, and by the way, that's a large part of how they grow, is the balkanization of standards. So when you take a product and you balkanize the standards across many different countries, for good reason, maybe for that country, the problem is large companies have legions of engineers and lawyers to help them comprehend and deal with that. SMEs do not have that. As much as digitization removes the obstacle for distribution for them, balkanized regulation, the absence of standards, the absence of interoperability, the absence of dialogue between countries at the right level is one of the biggest impediments for SMEs to grow and develop. We must do something about that. We must engage with countries on this topic. Secretary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, was very supportive of an organization called the Millennium Challenge Corporation. And she's going to start smiling that I even know about it, but it's a fact. She used that as a way of driving standards for what countries can do and should do in return for getting capital and access to aid. I think those are the kind of brilliant ideas that need to be revisited and revitalized among countries like us and Indonesia and other such far-thinking locations.
Talking of the fact that Indonesia is trying to streamline regulation, they are trying to make the opportunity. I think it was Tom Orlick from our Bloomberg Intelligence was highlighting that Indonesia, come 2050, is likely to be the fourth biggest economy as long as it can harness the digital opportunities ahead of it. We've got a question from the audience asking just about that, about embracing fintech and the financial element of that. Minister, how are you seeing your government leverage fintech, for example, and do you think you're embracing it enough?
Well, first, I think providing regulatory framework in which fintech have the same level playing field with the financial sector is very critical. And in this case, for government, especially Indonesian government, Minister of Finance, we provide fintech, in this case, equal opportunity, for example, to do the retail of the government bonds. In the past, we only provide this kind of agency only for the banking system. So this also creating a new opportunity for them. But fintech definitely have a lot of opportunity, as Ajay mentioned. When the digital technology is already introduced with the right infrastructure, we also see from this COVID situation that small, medium enterprises who connected to the digital platform, they are less affected in terms of their sales. So these are all very important evidence base that we are going to then continue providing support for many SME so that they are going to be able to then link to this marketplace. For the fintechs, the question, of course, in terms of the not only infrastructure, but also the interoperability, as mentioned by Ajay. Many of them working with the bank. If we can see that there is also a debate between fintechs and the banking system, whether they are subject to the equal regulation, especially prudential regulation. These have become an issue, for example, like in China with this Alibaba and Arne Capital. The same thing is whether you are going to have the same regulatory between the traditional conventional banking system with the fintech. And the last one is, of course, for Indonesia, we are really seeing a lot of fintechs growing, and also a huge appetite for many companies, especially also from the United States, coming to Indonesia. The problem is, of course, then the fair competition. Many of these fintechs created, and then when they are growing, then they are then get the acquisition from the bigger company. So there will be never really a level playing field. Because the bigger you are, you have the ability in terms of capital support, liquidity, in order for you to be able to dominate the market. So the question about fair competition is going to be really critical on this digital technology, because when you are dominating, then you get all the economic scale as well as all the services, which is getting better for the people. Then people tend to go to this big company also. It's going to be very difficult for the new entrants to actually then establish their presence in this kind of market. So for us, I think Indonesia is still a very growing market, middle income. A lot of excitement, especially for the millennial generation, the younger demographic. They are more tech savvy, and they really see this digital technology as one of what we call it the social promotion for them, as well as really that they can work and enjoy their job while using this digital technology. So this is really a huge opportunity and democratizing the opportunity for all, especially for those which is from the younger generation. And we are very optimistic on that. In order for us to capitalize that, this is not only an economic issue. We have to reform the education in Indonesia. We have to reform this consumer protection. We really have to make sure the data is going to be protected. And of course, the regulation, which really keep to be updated with this new phenomena. So this is the area that I, as a chairperson of the Financial Sector Stability Board in Indonesia, we continue working with Central Bank and Financial Sector Authority in order for us to be able to formulate the correct and the right policy that will providing the right incentive for this fintech, while at the same time protecting the consumer and creating the level playing field.
a level playing field that is a global playing field, of course, and you speak wisely because you worked at the World Bank, at the IMF. You know multilateralism. So too does the 67th Secretary of State in the United States. And we heard Ajay speak so passionately about the need for multilateralism, the need to work globally. Secretary, I put to you, as we have but 2 minutes left in this panel, your hope for multilateralism now, your hope for the new administration to be able to reach cross-border, particularly with the likes of the Alibaba-grown Chinese company. You know, this is a US versus China, but US and working with the rest of the world.
You know, I believe strongly that there has to be a renewed effort by the American government under the Biden administration to try to rebuild multilateralism, not for the sake of it, but for using it as a tool to try to reach some agreements on some of these issues. As the minister was saying, it would be a lot easier for her to deal with the challenges that fintech and tech and digitization and everything else that she's facing in Indonesia, if there could be an effort to develop some global standards, as Ajay said. I mean, the lack of global standards in a globalized economy makes it very difficult for not just governments, but businesses and consumers to know what the rules are. I mean, how are we supposed to understand what to expect from a global economy and from multinational corporations that can more easily cross borders if we don't know what the standards are? So I would like to see a concerted effort by the Biden administration to begin that process again, to look for some agreement. Now, maybe not every country would participate. We saw, as you just said, quite a disturbing action by the Chinese government with respect to Alibaba and Ant. As far as we know, they are cracking down and consolidating, but we should still get the rest of the world, because ultimately even China is going to have to sell into and work within a global economy, and we need to reestablish new standards to replace the standards of the past.
Here is to that global economy. Thank you so much for such a global conversation, all three of you. What a wonderful panel. Thank you to our audience for the questions as well. I wish you all to stay happy and healthy. Thank you very much indeed, of course, Secretary Clinton, of course, Ajay Banga of MasterCard, and of course, Minister Indrawati. We wish you well. Thank you.
COVID-19 lockdowns brought global travel for both business and leisure to an abrupt halt. How and when we can get the world traveling again is a crucial question, with huge implications for labor markets and of particular importance to many emerging economies. Here to discuss how the global travel industry might use this as an opportunity to reinvent itself is Karen Chan, CEO of AirAsia.com, Arnold Donald, President and CEO of Carnival, Arne Sorenson, President and CEO of Marriott, and Jane Sun, CEO of Trip.com. And moderating this conversation, Peter Greenberg, travel editor of CBS News.
Thank you, Scarlett. Good evening, good morning, wherever you happen to be. And of course, good evening, good morning to our panelists. When you set the picture of the lockdown and the future of the global travel industry, we are talking about total disruption on every conceivable platform, on every conceivable level, whether it's the labor market, the supply chain, airlines, hotels, cruise lines, everything that we're talking about leading up to 150 million jobs at risk and the threat that many of them will never return. Tourism-based economies at risk, with governments being in trouble in the same time because they depend so much on all of those segments combining to create that revenue stream and to create jobs and to keep jobs. So to my panel tonight, I want to ask one question first, which of course is our poll question to everybody watching. And this is the poll question. Of course, it's about after the lockdown. When do you expect to start traveling again? A, when there's a vaccine. B, I'm ready to jump on a flight right now. That would be me. C, I'll wait until the authorities tell me it's safe. And the one I love the most, I love Zoom. Business travel will never be the same. So we'll be looking forward to those results during the rest of this session. I'm going to start with Jane, with Karen first. And Karen, we're living in a world right now with airlift in real crisis. 34 separate airlines have failed. And we're not just talking bankruptcy, we're talking out of business. We're talking World's airlines will lose $84 billion this year. That's revenue they can never recoup. There you are running AirAsia with your route network at a time when so much of the world is shut down. How have you been able to pivot? How are you adjusting? And how do you see your way out of this? Because there's so many items there that are threatening you on a daily basis.
First of all, thank you for having me on this panel, Peter. Really appreciate this. And it's been amazing that the fellow panelists on this particular session, we are facing the same crisis together. And one thing that Tony has always reminded us is that never waste a crisis. If we look at what AirAsia as the airline is actually facing, we have actually been on a journey to pivot to become more than just an airline for the past 2 years. It took a virus, to actually go and accelerate that in the past 9 months for us. Maybe I can just quickly give you some stats on how the airline is doing, and then how we are actually rethinking and reigniting not just travel, but also other parts of the business that we see that will be the new normal as we actually go forward. So as we can imagine, when you ask me, the poll questions, I think I would actually say all of the above. It's going to be a hybrid of how passengers and consumers will now go and travel. We are basically anticipating, and we are quite confident in travel recovery for Asia. I think Asia will be in the forefront of the recovery for travel, because quite a lot of the markets in Asia are already in green zone. You are already seeing green shoots between Malaysia and Singapore with having the reciprocal green lane. Thailand already opening back to Chinese passengers coming into Thailand in a very cadenced manner. And then Hong Kong and Singapore are also establishing a travel bubble. So I think Asia would be at the forefront as we start looking at travel recovery. For AirAsia, we are very fortunate because most of the routes that we cover are mostly in green zones, and we continue to work very closely with government authorities and other travel stakeholders to go and ensure that we have a harmonized plan, a harmonized SOP, and ensuring that when borders open, and we are predicting basically Q2 or maybe the second half of next year, we are ready to go and grab it by the bull's horns. We have been doing a lot of consumer research. You are absolutely right for point B. Everybody just want to jump on a flight if they are actually allowed to travel. And that's why right now our focus is on domestic. We are basically pivoting to go and focus on domestic travel for the next 3 to 6 months, whether it's for Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and Philippines. We are now basically doubling down and consolidating our coverage on ASEAN because we feel that this will be the first part of the globe to actually recover. For Malaysia, we are now looking at about 70 to 80% of network for domestic prior to COVID. Thailand is basically the biggest bounce back. We are now experiencing 95% capacity for domestic.
Wow. Well, if you take a look at traditional travel industry response to crisis, it's usually been, well, let's discount our way out of it. Let's lower the prices. In your case, you've gone one step further. You're offering basically 2-for-1 deals, air passes, you buy the whole row. Is that stimulating traffic for you?
So you're absolutely right. We are trying whatever we can to go and re-stimulate and reignite travel demand. But what we've also noticed, which is the second part, as we start pivoting to become more than just an airline, we are very fortunate that digital transformation has always been our plan A. We are really the only airline backed by an OTA, which is our current platform. We are now putting a stake to say that we are the ASEAN's fastest growing super app. And we are really the only OTA that has actually got an airline. So it's very complementary, and we are now accelerating this. We have done a lot of consumer research during lockdown. You can imagine the first 3 months when COVID hit, we have 60 times more customer complaints, calling us for refund, calling us for flight change.
They're calling you about refunds.
Yeah, so we have to go and mobilize, 3,000 more of our cabin crew who were not flying to actually volunteer to work for our customer operating center. We were absolutely slammed. And we thought, apart from just, handling the complaints and, the refunds, we also want to go and ask the consumer, if we can fly again, what is your propensity and the likelihood for you to fly? And close to 85% of consumer will say, when it is safe to fly, I will fly. So it is the job of the airline and all the other travel stakeholders in this industry to ensure that we are actually reinstilling confidence for consumers to travel. And we've noticed three key things. The first thing is the flexibility of travel. How do we ensure that when consumers actually purchase a ticket and when dates change, when borders close, we actually make it very easy for them to actually go and change date without penalizing them? So the first thing we actually launch is that unlimited date change. If you need to go to Bangkok, and because right now borders are closed, we allow you 1 year for you to go and date change without any penalty. So that's the first thing, and I think many airlines are already doing that. The second thing we've actually done, and it's also a cash flow exercise as well, is that we encourage consumers to actually go and buy an unlimited flight pass. You buy now, you can fly as many times as you want for the next 12 months. And it has been an absolute hit. Because consumers are still basically being keyboard warriors, searching on the next dream destination they want to go, at home on their couch, they still want to go there. So we are capturing this particular sentiment and this pent-up demand and offer a new product whereby they can buy now and they can fly as many times as they want. We have launched it in both Malaysia, Thailand. We just finished launching it in Indonesia. The demand is phenomenal. And we do have some crazy avid travelers who've booked 54 times already, using this particular pass.
I would be one of them, by the way. You mentioned, Karen, about the OTAs, and that's a perfect segue to Zhang in Shanghai, because your operation there is a phenomenal one to watch as a model of behavior and pivoting in a crisis. In terms of the numbers that you're processing, the travelers that you're moving, China was the first to close down. You were also the first to open up. So what changes have you seen? What lessons have you learned to be able to move forward now?
Thanks for having me. First of all, I think China has done an excellent job. Once Wuhan is locked down, the government took very decisive measures to lock down every state, every city to clean it up. So it was very painful, very costly, yet it was very effective. So we really benefit from the very good and decisive measures the government has taken. And ever since Q1 lockdown, starting from Q2, we have seen a major and rapid improvements in the market. And secondly, I think as a largest player in the market in terms of travel, we also have been very innovative. So we have seen that the travelers has a demand, and also our airline partners as well as the hotel partners have perishable inventories. So we reach out to both sides, having the airlines to contribute their perishable inventory by having a deep discounted inventory for our consumers, and the hotel follows. And we are able to sell these perishable inventory at a very favorable price, and our customer in return needs to prepay for these products. And we also used very innovative method to reach out to our high-end customers and a young audience through live streams, through APPs, and it was very successful. Our chairman also did a very attractive cosplay in the market, which is a major sale for our consumers. So what we have done really took the leadership in the market to encourage our partners and our customers and injected the confidence into the market. So during the May holiday and also October 1st, Golden Week holiday, we have seen a very rapid recovery in the market. And what we have seen are three trends. First of all, our consumers pays more attention to safety. So what we did is ask our partners to join us for the Safety Alliance. Everyone who wants to have access to our consumers will offer masks, will offer hand sanitations, make consumers feel very comfortable to travel with them. Secondly, we have seen a rapid shift from traveling in a big group to traveling with a much smaller group. So we have seen our consumers prefer to travel with their close families, their good friends. So we immediately innovated new products to promote tailor-made products for our family customers and also close friends group. And thirdly, consumers also prefer to use the hotels and airlines, which offers flexible cancellation policies as well as refundable policies. And whoever join us for these programs also get a lot of volume. Now, going forward, I think the technology is very important. We use our technology to help our consumers to make reservations and control the volume into the attractions. Secondly, also innovative products such as helicopter tours, diving tours, ski tours, which normally is very tailored at a smaller group of the consumers. Now, because of the travel restrictions, these type of smaller tour becomes very popular in China. And looking into the future, I think Pfizer and other pharmaceutical companies have very positive announcement in terms of vaccine. So we are positive once the vaccine is in place, we'll be able to promote the outbound travel as well as global travel accordingly.
You know, Jane, you talk about perishable commodity. An unsold hotel room is revenue you can't recoup when the sun rises. Nobody knows that better than Arne Sorenson. Arne, let me ask you this. When you and I spoke 8 or 9 months ago, you were opening one new hotel literally every 14 hours. And then in a matter of weeks, of course, that stopped. How did you pivot? Because you have nothing but a perishable commodity.
Well, first let me say thanks for having me on, Peter. It's always great to see you, and Karen, Jane, and Arnold. Great to be on a panel with you. It's always been said that misery loves company, doesn't it? And while conditions have certainly improved from, Peter, that conversation we had at the beginning of this crisis, we are still at historically low levels of demand. And trying to work our way through. And of course, it's been a challenge. Jane talked about the Chinese government's response to COVID-19 when it first hit. Remember that third week of January, China was shut down in its entirety, and our business was down something like 95%. And in the rest of the world, it was in, about 6 weeks later, we saw it move to Europe and then to the United States, and the numbers were really quite similar. And so the first steps, of course, that had to be taken were to recognize the fact that the demand simply wasn't there. It wasn't about pricing the product. It wasn't about inducing somebody who was reluctant. It was about recognizing the fact that folks were either ordered to stay home or they wanted to stay home, or maybe a little bit of both. And I think in the 9 months or so that have elapsed since then, what we have seen really confirm a couple of obvious lessons. And we can maybe use China and the U.S., both big markets, to some extent quite similar. Don't tell the politicians I said that, because they like to drive us apart somehow. But both are principally domestic markets. China, of course, responded with its government approach to controlling the virus, and by and large has controlled the virus. And what we see is our business back in volume almost to 2019 levels. Varies a little bit by market to market. If you look at Sanya, which you think of as China's Florida, maybe as an example, business is better there now than it was in 2019, and that's because people feel like it's safe to get back on the road. Leisure travel is stronger than business travel, but business travel and group is coming back too. Coming to the United States, it's obvious the virus is not under control. We are getting more new cases every day than we've ever had before. And there's concern about healthcare capacity and the rest of it. But what we see notwithstanding that is when people can control the way that they get to their travel. In other words, if they can drive their own car, they're still inclined to get out of the house. They're tired of being locked in for 9 or 10 months. And so if I can take a driving vacation to a nearby beach or a nearby mountain or a nearby desert, or if I can go to a town nearby and maybe see some family, and I can be in my own wheels, I'm going to do that because I can safely be in a hotel. One of the advantages we have, of course, is once you get to the hotel, it's reasonably easy for you to control your own interaction with others. You can check in digitally in many hotels, but even if you can't, your room is your space. You don't need to see anybody else if you don't want to. Of course, if you're more relaxed and bolder, you can hang out in places where there are other people. But so it's as much about the sense of safety that people have in getting outside of the house and dealing with the transportation. And that's why driving is first. It does tell us, though, in the United States, even when the virus is running, people want to travel. People want to get out of their house. People want to see others. And when that sense is more broadly viewed as being safe, either because of a vaccine or because the virus numbers are down, we think we'll see people increasingly step out, not only patronize our hotels, but make their bookings through C-Trip and get on AirAsia and take a cruise with Arnold.
Well, Arne, what you're talking about really is a dramatic change in traveler behavior. It's not a question of whether we're going to travel or where or when. It's really a question of how. And so I'll throw this open to you and to everybody else. Have you seen a change in that behavior as it applies to your hotels, where people have gone from WFH, working from home, to WFH, to working from hotels, and choosing a hotel as a lifestyle choice at this point to leave the cities with their families and work remotely with everybody there?
Yeah, the answer is, of course, yes. And what, think about the warm weather destinations. Obviously, the weather's getting cold in the Northern Hemisphere. Typically, the trip to the Caribbean or to warm weather destinations would be for a week in the wintertime, maybe a little bit longer than that for some. But it was a classic vacation. And I think what we're seeing now is young people and others with families, with kids who can do their school remotely, saying, why don't we go down for a month or two and we'll dial it in. But we might as well enjoy that kind of environment because we can't be out and about. If we stay home, we're not going to be going to school, et cetera. I actually think one of the long-term consequences here, obviously there's lots and lots of debate about remote work and how much remote work is a permanent part of our landscape, particularly for office workers. And there's risk of that, of course, and what that means for travel. But there's also upside in the sense that if I can work remotely 2 or 3 days a week, well, you know what? I can take an incremental week where I go to a vacation destination. I work a couple of days from there, and I'm only taking a couple of days of vacation. And it works in a way that opens up more time for me to travel than I had when I was expected in the office 5 days a week.
So what does that mean for business travel, both domestic and international?
Well, international, of course, will be the slowest. And you could hear that even in Karen's comments. Stronger domestic travel in Malaysia, stronger domestic travel in many markets around the world. I think until we get to a place where people can travel internationally and not have to, A, worry about their health, which is the first question, of course, but then B, worry about getting caught in a government-mandated quarantine in a way that they haven't planned to. We've got to get through both of those things before we'll see the international travel come back to the levels it was at before. But it will come back. I mean, all of us, I think, on this call know, and Peter, you know this as well as anybody. Think about the time you've been traveling around the world. People love to collect the experiences that you can only get when you get away from home. Cultural experiences, people experiences, food and beverage experiences, the sights that you see. And when that gets to be safe again, I think that'll come right back.
You mentioned, Arne, about government-mandated quarantine. That leads me right to Arnold Donald with a government-mandated no-sail order, which is just recently lifted by the Centers for Disease Control. But Arnold, you've got how many ships out there?
We've got 90-something ships still out there. But first of all, I just want to say I'm really glad to join my colleagues, Karen, Jane, and Arne. And of course, always good to see you, Peter. But we still have 90-plus ships out there. We had 100 and something, but with the pause, first of all, we voluntarily paused, as did the entire industry. And unlike my colleagues here, we are pretty much still in pause. So we have a few ships sailing in Europe. We have lots of robust demand, but we are still not really sailing yet. And some of that is by mandate in a number of places here in the U.S., although once again, we voluntarily paused before the mandates were put in place.
But in terms of your basic model, you can't look at things in a one-dimensional way. It's not about just getting the ships ready. You have to have ports that want to accept you now.
Yeah, our ramp up will be staggered because all of the destinations won't open up at once. Right now, our Costa line is sailing in Italy with only one ship, though, because things have spiked again in Europe. The government asked us to continue to sail the one ship we have. It's low occupancy, not because of demand, but a combination of things, not the least of which is that much of the country is locked down and people aren't able to travel, within the country. But we've established a host of protocols, universal testing for guests and for crew. Crew also are quarantined before the testing, enhanced medical screenings, physical distancing on board, mask wearing, enhanced air handling, enhanced sanitation practices. And keep in mind, this is an industry that's dealt with viruses for many years, from MERS to SARS to other things like Ebola, Zika, and on and on. But this one is unique, obviously, because it shut the whole planet down and is still causing great grief in many places around the world. And so we have to take enhanced measures to set it up so that we can be part of mitigating the spread, and while at the same time giving people what Arne talked about when the time is right, that opportunity, for the greatest vacation experience and greatest vacation value there is in connecting with other human beings through the use using cruise as a vacation option.
Arnold, when you talk about what you're trying to do now, in the absence of a vaccine, even though we've had some good news in the last 7 days, how much can you actually get back in cruise and give people the confidence that they can get back on a ship when you had a situation last week with a ship sailing for the first time in Barbados where they had rigorous testing in place, where they were testing passengers before they got on the cruise, before they even got to the ship, before they got on the cruise, and when they got on the cruise, and you still had people testing positive for COVID, which ended up canceling the cruise, 7 passengers out of 53, so more than 10%. And that cruise line now has canceled all their cruises through next April. So there are the optics here that you still have to get over, don't you?
In a way, but to be honest with you, we have robust demand. And if you look at our bookings, second half of 21 and beyond, they're in the range of they would be pre-COVID. And we're not having the discount prices or anything. So people, keep in mind, while we impact millions of jobs, and while there's almost 500 million people a year that take holidays, only about 30 million can go on cruise ships. And unlike my colleagues here on the panel, we sail full. We don't have vacancies. So we're relatively small, and we have a huge base of previous cruise goers who frequently repeat. And so now they've been many months without being able to, get their dose of cruise, fascination. And so given that, the reality is we actually have good demand. So rebuilding demand isn't our issue. The issue is actually being able to actually cruise and do so in a way where we're confident, and then the various destinations are confident that we can do it in mitigating the risk of spread. And so the example you gave on our ships in Europe, a number of them have had some COVID cases. Why? Because it's in the community at large. We're not guaranteeing there will be zero COVID. You can't do that given the presence of it and community spread. But what you can do is mitigate the risk of it being on board, so very few instances, and then mitigate the spread once it's on board. And you can do that with all the effective layering of the medical screenings, the physical distancing, the mask wearing, some of the other social activity changes that we make with greater space in the theater and so on, distributing people to all the various dining areas. We have lots of public spaces with lots of open air and so on. And so, we can mitigate the spread and with effective contact tracing. And so the combination of all of that, allows us to give people the comfort that their vacation won't be disrupted if they don't develop symptoms, from COVID, and that if someone else on board has it, the chances they'll get it from that person are greatly reduced, and certainly no greater risk than if they were shoreside engaging in similar activities. And of course, our aspiration is that it's lower risk than what people would experience shoreside.
Arnold, your business model coming into the COVID crisis was that you did sail full. But when you start sailing again in February, March, and April of next year, I think almost by mission statement and definition, you are going to intentionally not sail full, correct?
Well, we probably won't sail at the levels we were sailing before for certain, because we will more than likely still have physical distancing, and we'll more than likely have a number of social activities modified so that the density, the space per guest will be greater. So yeah, we'll probably be at occupancy levels almost certainly below what we historically were at. But keep in mind, we count lower berths, and so during the summertime we might be sailing at 120% capacity. So reduced capacity for us legitimately could still be, a decent percentage of lower berths on the ship. So again, we're not worried about demand. We're not worried about, ability to price to attract people. What we need to do is make certain we are able to sail safely again, that the destinations are comfortable, that we have ways on excursions to make certain people, like we do in the European sailings today, that people are on excursions that are guided and allow a certain amount of physical distancing and social distancing and so on. And as long as we do those things and manage it well, then we look forward to being able to have people cruise again. And at the same time, the technologies are evolving and the science is evolving. And so someone mentioned the vaccines on the call here. There's multiple vaccines coming, enhanced testing, rapid tests, lower cost tests, more accurate testing. All those things are tools to use to help mitigate the spread and allow people to enjoy, again, social activities that they really want to. And as Arne pointed out, just connecting the world. So when people come together the way they do on a cruise and in other forms of travel, they discover what they have in common, and then they learn to celebrate the differences rather than to fear them. And that's the human spirit aspect of travel and what it's really all about. And we are very much looking forward to being able to play our part in that again in the very near future.
Of course, that also means the ports have to be comfortable with your ships as well. You saw the recent vote in Key West, Florida, where they essentially banned all cruise ships above a certain number of passengers. You have the mayor of Dubrovnik in Croatia limiting the number of ships in port in any given day to 2. We haven't seen Canada reopen their ports yet, which affects, of course, the Alaska cruise season. So what are you telling the ports to give them a comfort level that will welcome you back?
Well, take Dubrovnik. The mayor there is a good friend of the industry. And in fact, as we went to protect Old Town there, basically what we all volunteered as an industry was to stagger the arrival of ships and so on, so that there wasn't the big congestion in Old Town that really created a real issue. But cruise is not really the biggest part of that, but we want to do our part of it. Staycationers and daycationers often, take like Venice is another popular place people talk about. They may get 24 million visitors a year, 1.5 million to 2 million are cruise. The other 20-something million are not cruise goers. So having said that, we want to do our part. And so we work closely with Dubrovnik, and we have a great partnership with them. Key West is a different story, and we always respect people as their home, and we respect people's home wherever we go, and whatever they want is their prerogative. But we go to 700 destinations around the world with our 9 World-leading cruise line brands, and there are plenty of places to go and plenty of places that really want those visitors to come and those cruise guests to come. And so, we go where the guests are welcomed, and we go where we can deliver the kind of experience the guests are looking for.
Karen said earlier that she would answer the poll question with yes to all 4. Well, the poll results are in, and Karen, you were probably right. Take a look at these numbers; they're just about even. I guess everybody wants to do what you want to do. So interesting results there. Although I'm sort of surprised about the last one about Zoom. But Karen, let me go back to what you were talking about how you pivoted as an airline, because as I'm speaking tonight, Thai Airways is announcing they're essentially out of cash. Norwegian is not going to get help from the Norwegian government, and they may go under. In Mexico, the Mexican government is actually advising, in an official statement, their citizens not to book on an airline called Interjet because they're so financially unstable. So where do you see the airline business go? More mergers, more consolidations, and more failures as we come out of the lockdown?
That's a really good question. So it's interesting when you look at the poll that 29% of all the pollers are actually willing to go and take a vaccine. In fact, my founder, Tony, is actually volunteering all of us to go and try the vaccine out when it's available in Malaysia.
He's volunteering you. I get it.
Absolutely. I'll be going with him together. If we look at the aviation industry, it's going to be a deep, harsh winter. And I do expect that there's going to be convergence. And that's why, whether it's just within the aviation or for the entire travel industry, what we have actually tried to do to go and survive, right, is to go and basically collaborate instead of compete. And that's why, Jane Sun is also on the panel today. I mean, AirAsia has actually signed a strategic partnership with Citron, because the only way that we can actually survive is to fight this together. The same that we are working also very closely with Marriott Hotel. And Arnold would love to also go and sell, cruises as well, hopefully next year. What we're seeing is that as we need to go and basically reignite the confidence in travel, there's a few things we need to do. How do we go and basically, there was one question that you were asking earlier, Peter. How has consumer sentiment to travel changed? We are seeing it, especially within ASEAN, that consumers are less impulsive and a lot more intentional and planned. Because now they can no longer say, okay, Friday evening, I want to fly to Bangkok for dinner and then come back Sunday. Because they need to go and do a COVID test. They need to go and upload their health documentation. So what are travel stakeholders and partners doing to go and pivot from carefree travel to hassle-free travel? And what AirAsia has actually done as we start basically expanding into a super app is that we need to go and make sure that when consumers want to go and whether it's buying a hotel, whether it's actually purchasing a flight, we are now allowing them to go and book their COVID test as part of InPath. We are actually connecting with 17 different hospitals within Malaysia that if you want to go and do a COVID test 72 hours before you need to fly, you can now do it on airasia.com. We already have automated the uploading of health documents so that we know that whether you're fit for travel, unfit for travel, directly working with the clinics, all those are already automated and integrated so that we are trying to go and make it as seamless as possible for consumers. We can't change the fact that...
Karen, let me just switch for a second, because you mentioned something about the spontaneity of travelers, and that really goes to what Jane is doing. Jane, have you seen that change that Karen is talking about, where people are now saying, I'll book 3 weeks in advance and not 3 hours in advance?
Definitely. I think consumers want to make their reservation much more carefully. And I echo with Karen that during this challenging time, it's the best time for the whole world to work together as one globe, one team. We work very closely with AirAsia. We work very closely with Arne's team. And also, Arnold, I love to send customers to the cruise industry because people have pent-up demand. They are ready to travel. We just need to work very closely to make sure we give the confidence to the consumers and we offer a very safe environment for them to travel. If we can do that, it will be win-win for everybody.
We've seen government stimulus packages for the airlines. There may be another one in the offing if Congress gets their act together before the inauguration, maybe, maybe not. We have not seen a stimulus package for cruise lines, and we haven't seen one for hotels. Arne, I know that 4 years ago when President Trump was elected, you wrote him a letter. Now, recently, you wrote President-elect Biden a letter. What are you asking for in that letter?
Well, the letter really addressed three things. And as I did with President Trump's election 4 years ago, I tried to put myself in their shoes and think about their own philosophies and what they said and promised during the campaign. And consistent with that, then give some recommendations that I thought would be constructive, not just for our business, in fact, principally for the economy or for the globe. And so with President Biden, many of these things he's already said, but I stress three areas of priority for him. One would be to bring us back together. Obviously, we are as divided in the United States as we've been in my lifetime. And we need a president who's going to do everything in his or her power to pull us together and get us all working in the same direction. Two was the COVID response itself, and that is both about the healthcare, managing the healthcare aspects of that crisis, but also principally helping those who have lost work or small businesses, particularly, both of whom, if they're not helped to bridge from over the pandemic, it will be much harder for them to come out. And Peter, you and I have talked about this at length, but if you go to particularly coastal cities in the United States that are dependent on office workers, those cities are dead. And the businesses that were built to serve those workers, whether they be coffee shops or restaurants or clothing stores or parking facilities or what have you, they're closed and maybe they'll never reopen. And we've got to make sure that they are surviving this. And then, of course, the third with President-elect Biden was to say, now let's look longer term at the economy. How do we confront the fact that the economy will be troubled because of the pandemic we've been through? How do we deal with the desire to make sure that we are increasing pay, particularly for those who are paid the least? How do we make sure we deal with the massive fiscal hole we're building because of pandemic aid through tax policy and the rest? So I address some of those sorts of issues as well. But really trying to focus on COVID-19 and then governing to bring back growth and to bring us all together across the United States and in many respects across the globe.
Last question for Arnold, and that's this. People have a pent-up demand. You know it. They want to get back, especially your repeat cruisers want to get out there. What have you done in terms of your financial model to change the financing of a cruise for the consumer, to allow them maybe a different way to do it other than a credit card, or a different way to do it other than how they pay in advance, so that they have confidence, so that they can go, and that if for any reason there's a problem and the cruise doesn't go, they can also get their money back?
Well, you know, the cruise industry has a long history of taking care of our guests. And so, frankly, we're very flexible when it comes to honoring our guests and their needs. And we don't really need to do anything right now in particular because we're going to have a limited number of ships, limited availability. But we want people to be able to cruise with confidence, to know that if for some reason outside of their control, the cruise gets interrupted, they're taken care of. And we did that with 200 and something thousand plus guests when things suddenly happened in March. And we'll do that in the future.
And I think that applies to everybody in terms of refunds, insurance, and giving people, from a destination point of view, destination assurance as well, so that they know they can go somewhere and not get stuck and be unable to get home. I think we're out of time. So I want to thank Jane and Karen and Arnold and Arne. Thank you for doing this in the evening and in the morning. And I'm going to throw it back to Scarlett.
Thank you for joining us for day 2 of the Bloomberg New Economy Forum and our focus on cities. Please join my colleague Carol Masser tomorrow morning starting at 8 a.m. Eastern Time for day 3 of the forum. Tomorrow's focus will be on climate. We'll hear from European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, former U.S. Energy Secretary Ernest Moniz, and Tata Executive Chairman Natarajan Chandrasekaran. I'll be back with you for tomorrow evening session starting at 7 p.m. Eastern. We wish you well.